everybody, to the first webinar of the Cathedral District-Jax for 2026. The first webinar we have we do 4 or 5 different topics throughout the year. The first one is all about our parks and aren't they becoming dynamic, particularly downtown. This one is on parks, paths, and public life, growing Jacksonville's green space. And we have with us some very important people who have made this happen in our community. I am Ginny Myrick. I am the CEO of Cathedral District-Jax. We are redeveloping 36 blocks of the northeast quadrant of downtown. And I want to just do a couple of housekeeping tips at the beginning to tell you that you can ask questions. You just go to your chat box and fill in the questions, and then Misha will give them to us at the end. She is our production manager today. So let me first introduce our 2 experts. Linzee Ott. Linzee serves as the Interim Director of Jax Riverfront Alliance, and she is spearheading the development of the nonprofit to oversee riverfront parks and public spaces in downtown Jacksonville. The Alliance is a public-private partnership, which is fairly common throughout other cities, partnering with the City of Jacksonville to ensure the riverfront meets national standards of high-quality maintenance, programming, and activism. Formerly, Linzee was the CEO of Build Up Downtown, which led efforts for historic preservation and creation of public spaces in downtown. She is the Emeritus Director of San Marco Preservation Society and currently Chair of the Downtown Investment Authority's Downtown Development Review Board, DDRB. That is an incredibly important position in Jacksonville. Linzee has worked legislatively in Washington, D.C. and Tallahassee. And then we also have with us Nancy Powell. Nancy Powell is known to many of you. Nancy has served as Scenic Jacksonville's first executive director since February of 2020. And I believe, Nancy, you can correct me, I believe you just announced your retirement recently from that position. In this role, she has led the organization's programs, advocacy, and outreach to ensure that the organization fulfills its mission. They are most famous for their special events, which will draw about 350 people, to bring in a well-known speaker to speak about urban development. Nancy is one of the founders of Riverfront Parks Now, the coalition, which she will tell us about, that started all of the focus back in 2020 on our parks and our public sector alignment with the river. Earlier in her career, Nancy was a marketing executive in Boston and New York, and with Comcast here in Jacksonville, which I did not know. She later worked as a consultant and operations VP at Stop at Nothing Inc., a leadership development firm. So she's well grounded in what she does. And I welcome both of you ladies for being with us for this little discussion today about our wonderful park system. There have been lots of parks that have opened in Jacksonville and that are under construction, particularly in downtown. River's Edge on the South Bank, the former landing site, which is now called Riverfront Plaza, and Metropolitan Park is under redesign. The look of these parks, as if you haven't been to any of them yet, you must go. They are world-class parks. The attendance at River's Edge Park is 1,000 on the weekend. I was with the director of the DIA this morning who told me that there were 1,600 people there this past weekend. Their design is unique and it's first class. And part of it, I think, we'll talk about today is that there's plentiful free parking. It takes a long time to produce these kinds of parks, lots of planning, especially waterfront parks, because of the change in the climate of the last few years, particularly what we saw in Jacksonville with the flood, and they have to be built in a certain way that accommodates that. The city recently passed just about a $2 billion budget for operating funds, but hidden in that is a $560 million budget for capital improvements. So when I say these parks cost a lot, they do. The Shipyard West Park, which is what the category in name is, which will be the new Metropolitan Park, it will be $54 million. Riverfront Plaza, now under construction, is a little over $22 million. And the Mosh relocation, the Museum of Science and History, over to the North Bank at the park is $20 million. So it's they do take a long time, but that's one of the primary reasons why they do. Nancy, if you would start just a little bit, give us the history of the Riverfront Parks Now group, who started it and why it was started, and then what your strategy was to get attention paid to this whole subject matter.
Okay, well, as she said, I started with Scenic Jacksonville in February of 2020. And if you recall, what happened in March of 2020 was the pandemic. And the pandemic actually ended up being somewhat of our friend in that scenario. But in January of that year, Matt Carlucci had started a special committee on resiliency. And there was a number of organizations that had gathered together to support that effort. And it ended up going to hiring our CRO, Ann Colanese. So Irma had just been a couple of years before. Things were just starting to get back to normal from rebuilding perspective. As you recall, downtown flooded, and it took a lot of people by surprise that it flooded so much. You always expected it at the beach. So resiliency was on kind of everybody's mind. And it so happened that a group of us kind of would go to lunch after these resiliency meetings and started talking about resiliency downtown. What is going on? Shorelines versus bulkheads, and McCoy's Creek was being designed at that time. So actually, Jimmy Orth from the Riverkeeper, who's of course very involved with water issues, we started just doing some research, and we would send letters or emails back and forth. Look at what Chattanooga is doing, and look at what Memphis is doing, and look at what these other cities are doing, and all the parks that had been. And one of the strategies was riverfront parks, right? Waterfront parks. And so the ones that had been built in the past 5, 10 years before that were all being built for resiliency. But it wasn't just resiliency. It was community gathering. It was economic development and resilience. And so they serve multiple purposes. And the parks that have been built in since 2015 are super different than the old passive parks of, City Beautiful days, where there was, and Memorial Park is one of them. Memorial Park is a wonderful,
The,
uh,
the park that's right behind you in your picture.
that's right behind me.
Right.
But anyway, so we started just doing research on what others had done. And when you look at downtown, of course, this was not a new idea. I just want to make it clear. John Payton had a waterfront plan that was a good one. So we looked at all the previous plans. John Delaney had plans for the Better Jacksonville plan, and he did a lot with parks, but not as much downtown. But we looked at all the land that was available, and the shipyards had been vacant for like 30 years. And Metropolitan Park was kind of left for dead. And then the landing had just been raised. So it had been, demolished, and the courthouse had been demolished. All those things happened in 2019. So by 2020, it was still recent. It was like, oh my gosh, what do you do with all this land? And so we looked and we started saying, well, let's do a master waterfront plan like John Payton had envisioned, and get the community engaged. And what should we do with this land? How much of it should be parks? How much of it should be developed? And some of you may remember that the mentality really was, let's just develop it all, get it off the get it off the tax rolls, or get it onto the tax rolls. And so we started out, basically we went to the Curry administration, we talked with the Jaguars, we then talked with the Downtown Investment Authority, because they have purview over downtown. And so that was really the first part. And we put together a simple PowerPoint with 15 pictures of what other cities were doing. And so why can't we do this? And I remember saying to and then the pandemic, back to the pandemic, everybody was on Zoom. So we just did all of these Zoom meetings. And one of the persons who was very influential was Nina Waters from the Community Foundation. She told us, so it was a few of us. So it was the Late Bloomers Club, Barbara Ketchum from the Late Bloomers Club, Jimmy Orth from the Riverkeeper, and me from Scenic Jacksonville. And there were several other Scenic Jacksonville folks involved. So we were this core kind of group. So we went to Nina and we were looking for some initial funding so we could do some planning or visuals. And she said, you cannot do this as a small group or as one organization. You have to get it out there. And so So we went to the resilience, there was a group, as I said, this resilience group, and we started kind of taking our show on the road, which is just showing all these pictures and then the reasons for doing it. So economic development, even though we started with resilience, economic development became the attractive lever, right? That kind of, puts the light bulbs on, which is the well-designed parks have valuable real estate right around them, right? So, Bryant Park in New York is a great example. It's 5 acres. It used to be derelict. They rebuilt it. It's an amazing park, and all the real estate around it is highly valuable. Now, that's New York City. And so we chose not to focus on the major cities. We wanted to focus on what's happening in Chattanooga and what's happening in Memphis and what's happening in Sarasota and Cincinnati, the mid-sized cities that people could envision that Jacksonville is. We're not New York, we're not Chicago. But
So how was it politically received when you first rolled it out?
well, to be honest, the Curry administration was not interested in it because there was some interest in some small parks along the river, but not, we wanted to save Metropolitan Park, by the way. So at the time, there was a bill that wanted to basically sell it, give it away or trade it. And we didn't agree with that. So we got that retracted. And then the shipyards, the shipyards, they now call Metropolitan Park the shipyards, but the so the shipyards is kind of a funny term. And the landing space, already had some different renderings as to what could you do, what should you do with that. I would say so. I would say it was mixed. I think the Downtown Investment Authority at the time we presented to their strategic group, and it was a light bulb. I mean, I think Lori Boyer had already been very involved with the waterfront stuff because she had started the renovations at Friendship Fountain. She had started the musical park ideas. So all those things had been done before. So I don't want to take credit for all these things. It was just the push towards rethinking
Yeah.
how we could use these parks.
Yes,
And
you're going to the Downtown Investment Authority. The DIA is as you know, they're charged with the responsibility of managing the CRA, the Community Redevelopment Agency for all of downtown, which is for most people, they don't know this, but is a very large swath of land, both the North and the South Bank. So, Lindsay, in your position, you're now the chair of the DDRB. Is there your primary focus at the DDRB is the look, the design of what is being built? They have to come and make a presentation if the private sector is doing it. What is the relationship between the park look, the park design, and the DIA? Can you talk to that just a little bit to see if you're in the loop, or does the city just go out with an RFP and bring in their own designer?
Great question, Ginny. So I'm first, before I get to DDRB, I'm going to respond. At the very beginning, you called us important people who have made this happen. And I just want to be fully transparent that I'm a newcomer on the scene. I'm newer to the parks and the riverfront advocacy stuff formally, but I am a native of Jacksonville, and this is something that I've always wanted to see growing up here. And so while I'm formally new to the effort, I've always been a big supporter. So just want to clarify, don't want to take any credit that's not due because, you ladies certainly have been involved a lot longer than I have. So yes, so Downtown Development Review Board. So we review and make decisions with respect to redevelopment applications within the downtown overlay that are consistent and compatible. We want to make sure all the proposals are consistent and compatible with the master plan, with the design guidelines, with the district regulations. And so while we don't have a necessarily check the box vote process in function, excuse me, as part of the process of the parks planning. The Parks Department in the city has always been really wonderful to keep us updated on the progress. And so it's a little bit different with the public projects versus the private projects. You're absolutely right. Applicants, private developers will come to us with a project, usually for conceptual approval, final approval. There can sometimes be steps in between. Whereas the public-led projects, it's more of an informational conversation. And they do come to us asking for feedback because we do. The DDRB is comprised of experts in the fields of, landscape architecture and design and development. So it is a really important step in the process. And I think the DDRB serves a really valuable function in the overall ecosystem of what's happening in downtown, because it also, not only do we get to ensure that things look nice and look to a certain quality and standard that we want for our downtown, but it acts as an avenue for the community to have a voice in those different both public and private projects that are coming through.
As the interim director of Jax Riverfront Alliance, which is the baby that was born by what Nancy Powell's consortium did, how is that in relationship with the city going? Is it a contentious relationship? Is it a friendly relationship, or is it slow?
So it is not contentious. I will say that. I will say anything with government. Speaking as somebody who has worked in government 98% of my entire career, government is just slower. That's the nature of government. So just to back up, Nancy kind of explained the Riverfront Parks Now, and Riverfront Parks Conservancy is the nonprofit that grew out of that work. And in 2025, the mayor's office and the DuPont Fund convened a steering committee of civic leaders in the community, and it was about 25 folks. And over the course of a good 8 months, we looked at what does Jacksonville need? What does Jacksonville want for its riverfront? And so we studied national best practices. We studied other cities. We studied peer organizations, other conservancies. We hired some experts to do some research for us. And the recommendation that came out of that steering committee was this public-private partnership model that other cities have. And so that is where the Jax Riverfront Alliance came from. The Riverfront Parks Conservancy, the original mission was very, 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 very similar to what we're hoping to achieve. And so the Riverfront Parks Conservancy no longer exists. It actually evolved into the Jax Riverfront Alliance. So
Okay.
I know we've got a lot of acronyms and organizations in downtown. So all that to say, we will be partnering with the city to activate these public spaces along the Riverwalk to keep them vibrant and fun and safe and clean and welcoming, to market them. So that is, we're very early in the process. If you haven't heard of us yet, that's because we haven't publicly launched yet. So you're in on the ground floor. But no, the relationship with the city has been great. We are aligned in the vision and the things that we know we want to see for a riverfront. And so it's not a question of if, it's a question of just when and how that we're working through, and we're working through it. So we're really excited to work with the city and to get going. As you can see, there's a lot of attention and energy around these parks. So we're excited to support what they're already doing and make it even more exciting for folks.
Yeah, and let me just add that one of the first questions we got, so we formed this coalition. We had a lot of advocacy to create these riverfront parks. Again, we were advocates. We did not make it happen. The city, the DIA embraced the idea. The city embraced the idea. Curry put in, despite initial reservations, put in $100 million of initial funding. So Curry started that funding piece because if you didn't have funding, you weren't going to really do anything. But one of the first questions we got when we started talking about this, well, Jacksonville doesn't always take care of its parks. Well, okay, if you have all these parks, then who's going to take care of them? And,
Right.
and so, that was the impetus to starting up the Riverfront Parks Conservancy, which was a very startup organization. We just knew it was going to be necessary. So we said, let's get started on it. And so that evolution is now in place. And I think the city leaders all recognize that that level world class. We wanted world class design and world class management. And so that it's not just your neighborhood park. No offense to everybody's neighborhood park is really important, but the downtown parks serve a slightly different function. They're attracting people. And we felt that it was a strategy to get more people downtown, which is the goal overall, right? It's not just residents, it's not just workers, it's visitors and things to do. And these parks serve that function. And it's being proven out, as you said, with River's Edge, with Friendship Fountain, with Riverfront Plaza's playground. People are coming, and it's really
Yeah.
great to see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think the theory behind what you've both been involved with for years now is very proven with these numbers of people who are coming. And I just casually mentioned this at the beginning, but a big portion of drawing people downtown is what do you do with your car? So having an abundant place to park your car and get out of your car and make it easy to get to the park is a big plus. I think a portion of what happened with Metropolitan Park was twofold. One, there was no residential around it for miles and miles and miles, and there was very little place to park. It didn't feel safe. So it was successful from a boating standpoint, but it was not successful from a play standpoint. And then the programming is the next aspect of it. So have you seen a lot of interest, both of you, either one of you, in a surge of interest in design and any pushback to these costs? Is there a lot of discussion about, wow, this costs so much to manage and maintain, and this landscaping is so sophisticated that it costs a lot to keep it up? I mean, what is the feeling politically and both within the citizens of the city? Because you hear both sides of it on that topic.
Well, this is where benchmarking makes a difference, right? So when you research what other world-class parks that have been built recently cost, you realize that there's a 7-acre park in Cary, North Carolina, which is an amazing park, and it costs $68 million. It is an amazing park. It's got all sorts of stuff in it. So if you design it well, and you're going to design some things for resiliency, right? That is going to cost money. There is obviously people are always going to question the amount of cost, but once it's done, if it's great, people are no longer going to think about that, right? How much did that cost? Who cares, right? It was like the Friendship Fountain. It's so great to have it again.
Yeah.
Um, so that's just what I would say about the cost. But the design really is important. It's important for things to do. So multiple things, placemaking means 10 things to do in a place. And so you can't, that's where Metropolitan Park, I would say, it was a very passive park. And it was beautiful and it was nice and there were great trees there and they did have a dock. The kids' campus was not kept up, right? So they demolished the kids' campus after 10 years. That was all that left. So you have to design it and then you have to keep improving it. And that's where
Mhm.
the Jacksonville Riverfront Alliance comes in.
Yeah. Do both of you
so
remember the very first development in Brooklyn called 220 Riverside? It's very popular. filled up rapidly. More apartments have been built. It's not on the river, but as part of the design of that TOD, the Transit Oriented Design Development, is a park referred to as Unity Park. And the developer paid for the programming in that park for a couple of years after it started. And after a while, it's supposed to be a public-private park. The city was supposed to pick up the programming and it never happened. That park is dead now. There's a waterfront, beautifully designed oasis next to these apartments. So what do you do in an area like that where if it's not programmed or not programmed well, such as what happened with Metropolitan Park? Lindsay, what do you think could be done to revive Unity Park, which is in Brooklyn, which is a booming neighborhood within downtown right now?
Yeah, yeah, a huge residential density that you're very familiar with in Cathedral District. So to make the connection between our last point and this one, you know, the cost, yes, cost of programming and cost of maintenance, that was also a hurdle at 220 Riverside. But these parks in general, the riverfront in general, you asked if there was pushback. The costs are higher and different because the parks are different, right? These parks are special. They are not like most parks that we have in Jacksonville. And our riverfront itself is different. It is a phenomenal asset that we perhaps have not done the best job of utilizing thus far in Jacksonville. So it deserves special resources and special attention. So that's where a public-private partnership like the Jax Riverfront Alliance can really make a difference, because one of our very critical missions will be to go and fundraise. And when folks are enjoying themselves at the parks and see the impact these parks are having at the riverfront, hopefully they will want to give back and invest in the movement. And in that way, the private sector can come alongside the city and really maximize and optimize their investment in these public spaces. So 220 is a little bit different because it is a privately owned space, but there was a public-private partnership, and there's conversation again. My understanding is the conversation with the expansion of the Business Improvement District with DVI, that there's consideration for reviving some of those functions. And so again, that is the perfect type of situation where a public-private partnership really can solve some of those either tricky management or operational challenges that we want our public spaces vibrant and active and well maintained, but it sometimes doesn't make sense for a municipality to shoulder all of that alone. So I think 220, I think we're going to be hearing more about that space and some efforts. And I certainly, my focus is Riverfront, so I can't speak for what they're doing, but I am encouraged by the willingness to try out some more public-private partnerships in Jacksonville. This is fairly newer to us, and I think it'll be a good thing for us.
Yeah, I would like to add about Unity Park. I would not call it a park. It is concrete. I'm sorry. So the that is where design is super important. Okay. And that project, which included the restaurants up above there, really there was design flaws in the entire space because the restaurants were up away from the street. The park, the sidewalks had to go around cars. And this concrete, it was a retention pond that had concrete around it. So there really is a limited amount. You have to spend a lot of money in programming, and they tried it, and it really wasn't all that successful. You would have to spend, so programming can be a couple of different things. Program can be permanent programming, and a good example is the skate park. You have permanent programming there. People come there. You don't have to have a class. You don't have to have somebody there. You don't have to, physically help people figure out what to do in that park. And then there's temporary programming, which is all the yoga and the Pilates and other things that classes, and those are all good things to bring people down there, but you can't program 18 hours a day. And so you have to be able to have things for people, pleasant places to be. And Unity Park does not have any, I don't think anybody would call it a park, by the way, but it doesn't have any shade, and so in the summertime, like you can't use that space. So I think urban design principles for that are really because those restaurants also struggled. And it was partly because they were hidden away from the street. And, we could do some argument about that, and maybe it'll come back. Maybe somebody will make it, figure out a way to make it better and to have things that people want to stay in a space. So it's not just coming to the space, but you want to stay in the space. So
Yeah.
what's going to make you
I
stay?
would I would almost say that Unity Plaza, which is the name of it, is not a park. It's more of a performance area with the bank seating. But you're right, it's devoid of a whole lot of green space for sure. Europe has consistently been a leader in urban design, and they are pedestrian first. They have a pedestrian first attitude. In the United States, for years, it's always been a car centric. So this trend and this interest of change in the United States is coming from many different points of view. People who are sick to death of traffic, such as I was in New York last weekend, and it's a killer. They're sick to death of traffic. We don't have really traffic in Jacksonville comparatively to some of these other cities, although it's getting worse and worse. But
Knock on wood, Ginny, knock on wood.
right. Do you think that there is a new trend or interest in the United States, or particularly in the South and the Southeast, for a more walkable community?
Absolutely. I mean, Europe has a few hundred years advantage on us that people were already there and cities were already developing. And so, and they don't have as much land area as we do in the United States. We're very spread out. And so, that those European designed cities have always had an inherent density that the United States hasn't necessarily had to have. And you certainly have successful instances in some of our famous cities, metropolitan cities. But I think people are returning. I mean, cities in general, over the course of history, they expand, they contract, they have a life cycle. So part of that could be that people are making a swing back to urban living. Part of it, I think personally, people are hungry for community. We live in a pretty disconnected world because we're behind these screens all the time. And so facilitating gathering in the built environment and creating an opportunity for humans to gather, I think is really important now more than ever. And I think people, whether they realize it or not, they're hungry for it. So I think part of it has to do with just this human base instinct. And then there are some trends right now. Can hardly call myself young anymore, but apparently young people don't want to drive anymore. They don't want to own cars and they don't want to drive. And so naturally, they're moving to walkable communities and urban environments. And then on the opposite end of the curve, seasoned residents maybe don't want to take care of a yard anymore. And so they want to downsize and they want to go to an urban environment where they can walk to dinner all the time. So I think we are seeing a trend right now. And I think we are starting to catch up in some of our urban design. I think our housing design still has, and housing stock still has a long way to go to catch up, but that's a whole other conversation.
Right.
But I am encouraged
Yeah.
by the swing back towards walkable communities.
And I think the best example of that in Jacksonville is the Emerald Trail and the intense interest and support for the Emerald Trail. And the Emerald Trail, of course, uh, connects into the Riverwalk. And so when you look at the map of what the Emerald Trail is going to be, and this is an example that is in other cities, it started in New York with the High Line and in Atlanta with the Belt Line, and many cities are doing these trail networks. And that is a huge draw for new residents, existing residents, if they can be walking distance or biking distance from these trails. And again, they're doing a great job It's going to take a little while, but the segments that are, we have proof of concept now. There are links that are actually being done. And again, I think that's part of the skepticism that we had early on, was because people are not going to believe it until they see it. And
Yeah.
so with the Emerald Trail, the Riverwalk was done, but it kind of stopped, right? It didn't, they didn't finish it, and they still haven't finished it. But people love the Riverwalk. They love trails and walking, and I think there is now connected bike lanes and stuff is a whole nother story, and that's a longer term issue. But yeah.
Yeah. So let me just do a little comment here. We have a couple of questions that are coming in on, if you go to the box at the bottom of your screen that says chat, you enter your question in there, then our production manager, Misha Gibbons, will pull it all together for us. Um, about a year or so ago, I think it was this past year, Mayor Bob Buckhorn, who, by the way, is running for mayor again in Tampa, had came to Jacksonville at Scenic Jacksonville's behest, and he gave he really says the credit for Water Street and the waterfront development in Tampa, which we are often compared to, has a really important component to it, and that was his philosophy that the cities should do what they do best, which is build public spaces. And the developers then follow using that as almost what you'd call a loss leader to make those properties that are adjacent to those public places taxable properties. So it benefits both the city and it benefits the citizens who live in the city. Do you think Jacksonville has learned that is an important component to successful economic development, particularly for downtown?
I do.
Nancy. Nancy's about to bust.
I do.
Okay.
I was hanging on every word. I saw Mayor Bob Buckhorn when he spoke at, I think it was ULI's Downtown Development Forum last summer. But you're right, we often get compared to Tampa, and I think we're doing a lot of the same things Tampa did and has done. We're just a little bit farther behind. Mayor Buckhorn made the comment, the thing that Tampa did really, really well is they invested in infrastructure. The city invested in infrastructure and public spaces. They recognized what an asset they had in their waterfront. And Jacksonville is doing the same. Credit to Downtown Investment Authority when the pandemic hit. Private development kind of slowed down, and so the DIA pivoted and said, okay, well, we've got this time, we've got some funds, what can we do in terms of infrastructure in the built environment? And so that's where you saw things like the the Park Street Road Diet, and streetscape improvements. You saw the two-way street conversions, which, love them or hate them, they are a best practice. I don't want to hear it. So the city has done a lot of investment. I mean, not to mention the hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in these public parks all along the riverfront. So, Jacksonville's doing all the right things. And now we're gonna see the fruits of the investment, happen in the next few years. And it's always the proverbial chicken or egg, build it and they will come, or is it private development first and then public? But I think we have done a really terrific job of infusing downtown with both public and private investment in the last few years, with a huge focus on our public spaces. And I think we're well in motion, and we're well on our way to being a Tampa.
Yeah.
Well, so
I think go ahead, Nancy. Go ahead.
well, Bob Buckhorn, he was our 2022 speaker, and he was really phenomenal. But he and Mayor Deegan was a candidate at the time, and she heard his talk, and it was very inspiring, right? He was like, Jacksonville, this is your time. You can do this. And Tampa, their focus was a lot on the riverfront. I mean, the Riverwalk. They did do some parks along the Riverwalk also, but that connectivity, and I think that's where you get to when you talked about walkable. When we started and we look at this big downtown, even, it was the connected network of world-class Parks and Riverwalk, that was kind of our mission, was the connectivity between them. And our Riverwalk has to serve that purpose because people, it's beautiful, it's what people want to do. They want to be on the river. And Tampa has done that. Their Riverwalk is ranked one of the top in the country. Um, and by the way, they don't have restaurants every block on the Riverwalk, but it's not far that you can go to get things, to do things. And
Yeah.
so he was very inspiring, and I think he has been an influence with our mayor. But one of the things he said is that it wasn't what necessarily, I mean, he was the last leg, but there had been many mayoral administrations before him, and they all consistently carried that through. And that is something that I think in the past has held us back a little bit, is that different administrations have different priorities. And so how can you carry these through to successive generations of political leaders and city councils and things like that? And I think the good news is that our city council has recognized that this is an important strategy to downtown and to Jacksonville as a whole.
Yeah. So tell us, ladies, as we kind of wrap up here a little bit, what are your thoughts about what is the most exciting thing that you're thinking about for the park system, particularly in downtown? And what are you most worried about?
Lindsay, why don't you
Nancy,
start?
you've you've got a lot of years in this work, so I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Um, well, I'll say that I'm really excited that these are happening and that we do have proof of concept and that people, the worst thing would be is if we build these things and people didn't come.
Yeah.
And so they're coming. There's still opportunity for more to complete them. Riverfront Plaza is only half done. And so one of my worries is the length of time it's going to take to complete phase two, number one, to complete the rest of the Riverwalk, number two, to complete Metropolitan Park. And we have a lot going on. So I understand from a public works perspective, this is a huge thing. Whether we're phasing it to in a proper way or in a responsible way where we can keep having these things open over time and not have an extended period, because the longer things hold and wait, something could happen. And in fact, that happened with Metropolitan Park. They had $10 million that was going to redo the kids campus. And the city council, I'm sure you weren't on it at the time, the city council took that money away because they had some other obligation. And so it was allocated, it was approved. And so that's the worry going on. We do have the funding allocated, but if you don't use it, let's make sure these are getting done in a when we started, we had the idea that we could do it in 5 years. And of course, we're not, it's going to be another 5 years probably. But if we put our minds to it, we can get a lot done in a shorter period of time.
Yeah, that Lindsay mentioned that at the very onset, at the beginning, that working in government, it takes very a long time, and I know this from working in economic development for the last decade in the Cathedral District, that it takes a long time. It's a good 12 to 24 months before you can get the whole idea pulled together, and then it's another 12 to 18 months before you can even go vertical with it. So in that period of time, you have to remember, if you're doing what Lindsay's doing, which is a public-private partnership, you've got one partner who's lagging behind all the time. And in Jacksonville, like you mentioned, Nancy, the yin and the yang of our consolidation is really great in some respects, and in other respects, we're just too damn big. And when you're spread out so far with 19 different council people, 14 of which are representing their own districts, you're constantly battling, is downtown valuable to my neighborhood, my district, so that it slows the process down. So and in some ways, I think that's a good thing because you're dealing with public money, you're dealing with taxpayers' dollars, and they want to know where they're going. And if they're paying attention to what's going on in their city, which many of them are, because they show up in the audience of City Hall, twice a month, You have to be able to say I voted for that because I really felt like this was going to help my district. So the fact that 1,600, 1,500 people were in the park on the South Bank last weekend says they were not all from San Marco. They were from the south side and the west side. As a matter of fact, my daughter, who lives in Orange Park, came over to see the park and said, "Have you been there yet?" I said, "No, I haven't." She said, "Come, we're going." So I mean, it's an amazing thing, and it does draw from a way far away from the centric area of the park that you're building. So what we have maybe a few minutes left here to try and bring in some questions. Misha, have you got a couple that you might want to share with us that we
Jenny,
can
do you mind if I
toss?
share
Oh,
my the
please,
things I'm
yes.
excited about?
Yeah, sure,
Because
sure.
I'm excited about a lot.
Yeah.
So you asked about excited and then challenges. I see it as an opportunity. I think perception is one that is going to be interesting for Jacksonville. I think natives in particular, people who have been in Jacksonville a long time. I think we have a tendency to either take for granted the things that we have because this is an awesome city. And sometimes we forget that, or there are people that don't know about these parks and still do not know what's happening on the riverfront, no matter what part of town you're in. So I think some storytelling is going to be really important for my organization and for the rest of this downtown effort is to help people see, like you said it, proof of concept, and seeing is believing. So we are building it. They are starting to come, but helping get the word out and helping show people, no, this time it is real. It is different. These parks are really special. It's a challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity for us. And then personally, I'm excited. Two things: big picture, again, the connectivity, like Nancy talked about, getting everybody. I'm a big walker. I love walking outside, and so getting the Riverwalk connected and being able to enjoy, I mean, 5, 6 miles when it's all said and done someday,
Mhm.
of Riverwalk is going to be spectacular. In the shorter term, I'm really excited for Music Heritage Park again with the storytelling. Jacksonville has such incredible music history that we have not done a good job of telling the story. So excited for that park, and that should be opening in the next couple of months. So wanted to put
What are
that
you
teaser
most
out.
worried about?
There are little things, but I think there each are opportunities. I mean, when we talk about funding, I know there's a lot of consternation with the next budget process in City Hall, but I think that's another opportunity that the private sector, again, public-private partnership, can really step up and help ease some of the burden on the city and help shift resources. So yeah, there's going to be challenges, but there's also problem solving, and we can also turn them into opportunities.
Yeah, yeah. Great, great. Well, okay, we'll flip it to Misha if you want to give us a couple of questions. I see that Ted Pappas is with us today, who Ted is on my board, and he's had his hand raised. He would like to talk a little bit, but who else do we have that maybe you could take a look at what Ted wants,
Yeah.
Misha, and combine a couple of these
And I
questions?
just want to say Ted was part of the original group of our
Yeah,
steering committee, and he provided very valuable insights and advice.
yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you, Lindsay, for your perfect segue to the questions that popped up because you kind of managed to touch on every single one of them in your summary there. There's two large areas that come up in the questions. One is programming, how to get involved as an outside group. How can you manage to get to be part of the programming? Who do you contact? Funding, how is programming funded? How are, the amenities in parks funded, and how is it diversified to make sure that federal funding shortfalls or city funding shortfalls don't, negatively impact the parks? And then also safety. How do we leverage programming so that the parks do not draw the wrong elements?
Yeah.
That's the first one.
That's all one question.
That's all. Basically,
Holy
three
cow.
We
questions
need
that
another webinar
revolve
just on
around
that one.
programming.
Yeah, let's start with the programming and and maybe segue into the safety of it.
Well, programming is going to be something that the Jax Riverfront Alliance is going to be starting with immediately. As soon as we have our contract signed with the city's really excited for us to start programming because it's one thing for people to come check out these parks and experience them one time, but how do you keep them coming back? You need to provide some reasons, some things for them to do to keep coming back, to keep the interest there, to keep it, a fun experience. And I think so. I have a little bit of a background in law enforcement. I worked in the state attorney's office for 8 years, running all the community engagement for the office here. And so I think programming actually does flow really nicely into safety because when you have more feet on the street, you have a safer environment. And so as downtown grows and becomes denser from a residential standpoint, as more people are visiting these parks, they will naturally become safer because more feet on the street are a crime deterrent. So people using the parks, enjoying the spaces, is going to make it a safer feel. We are also, of course, looking at a multifaceted, safety strategy that not only involves law enforcement, because that's the smart thing to do, but also just presence is how do we make sure there is a presence in these parks so people feel welcomed and safe and that they know there's other humans around. So programming they really go hand in hand, in my opinion. And we're gonna be getting started with the programming soon.
One of the things that people say about downtown is, oh, I don't go downtown. I don't have any reason to go downtown. That is what we're going to be surprised about, the number of people that want to go to these parks. And the safety factor is part of downtown. You just have to be upfront about that. But what deters the crime element or the element that makes you feel unsafe is the mass appeal. So if you've got a lot of people in the park, it's safer. And the other aspect of that is that this is just an observation that I've made. In Bryant Park in New York City, they have their own little Bryant Park security. So I don't know if we would ever morph into something like that for perhaps some of the larger parks, but they're not police, but they're there for safe, secure feeling. It's a feeling, and that's how they manage them. Now, I don't know if Nancy, you want to touch on that a little bit. Did you get any pushback when you first started talking about developing parks, how safe they were going to be?
Well, it gets back to design, right? So if you design a park for this is kind of uh, there's an organization called 8 and 80, right? So you want things for people who are 8 years old and people who are 80 years old. But if a mother with her children are comfortable going to a park, it will be safe for everybody. And if it's not, then you got to think about that, right? So that's where I think the a lot of the playgrounds and the family friendly approach is on target, because that's really not that you don't want to have places for teenagers or late night people. I mean, that's where things can get, when does the park close, things like that. So but people need to feel comfortable. Now, downtown also has, all the cultural things. They have the symphony, they have Florida Theater. There are reasons why people come downtown other than the parks. But when you can add this plus this plus this, I can come to the park, then I can go to dinner, then I can go to the symphony, or I do a symphony in the afternoon and then, you know what I mean? So it's doing multiple things. It's not just going one place and then leaving. Right now, people come to the symphony and then they leave. We
Yes.
want people to do more.
We're changing that.
Right. And that's where the downtowns are different than the suburbs, right? Because the cultural heart is downtown. In most cities and in our city, it is the case. So I think, but you're right, safety is important and perception of safety is important. And so, but having more people just is usually, that's a good example. Look at Riverside Arts Market. There's a great example of it. It's on the riverfront. It's something that's been hugely successful. And it's a programming that, it's not, we stole it from another city. I mean, it's not something that was new, but it's been very critical to that part, the Brooklyn part. So people can launch there. They can walk up the Brooklyn Riverwalk. Now, eventually, there's going to be some restaurants along there that people can go to, and then there's going to be the McCoy's Creek Park that people can also go to. So you want to have, and there's the Y that's there too. So you want to have multiple things along the way and more things for people to do so they stay longer. And you don't just go to the yoga class and then leave. You want to be able to linger in the park and have other things to do. So, but to your point, and I think you see it at River's Edge, that the kids and the families, they're there, and there's not even a food truck there. That's where the additions are going to make sense. The small kiosks of food and beverage offerings. It doesn't have to be, my personal opinion is, it doesn't have to be a huge brick and mortar restaurant. You can have small places, like Bryant Park is a great example. They have these little places where you can go to get something to eat, a coffee, a glass of wine, a waffle, things like that. So again, it's adding, but that's where design comes into play, and things like bathrooms. So, I mean, those are the mundane things, but they just added the bathroom at Friendship Fountain. That's really important. Now, it's really important to keep that bathroom clean and so people feel it's safe. And there's a bathroom you have to have the bathrooms, but public bathrooms are not easy to manage. And this is where the Riverfront Alliance and Bryant Park, back to Bryant Park, they have an attendant outside
Yes.
the bathroom, right? And so do you need to go to there? That means it's going to be more expensive. But that's what other cities do to make sure that their public spaces are world class. And that's what we're aiming for.
Yeah, a big part of safety is perception, and then a big part of it is also maintenance. So if we can manage both of those two things in Jacksonville, we'll be miles ahead, I think. I want to thank both of you, Nancy and Lindsay, for this great conversation about our parks and we're sitting on what I just consider, after having been involved in downtown redevelopment for over 30 years, we are sitting at a precipice of just enormous explosion for downtown of wonderful, wonderful things. The private investment is staggering. I see it in the Cathedral District on a monthly basis. I do what I call a windshield tour, put them in my car and drive all around the 36 blocks and talk about this development here, this development there. And who's sitting in the car next to me are not Jacksonville developers. They're from out of the city. And they have been referred to me either by the DIA or they've talked to somebody and said, you need to go see what's happening in Cathedral Hill, which is the name of our neighborhood. That is what is happening in our city, that we have become, and I think a certain portion of that is because of the Jaguars have put us on the map, on the global map. But it's because we are still relatively inexpensive to invest in, inexpensive to buy on a portion per square foot, and very much open to that kind of thought. The DIA is thrown out the welcome mat and is inviting people in to see the city. I think we're on the precipice in the next 5 years of not recognizing what we have downtown. So I want to thank you both for talking about it with us. It's let me do a little plug for our next webinar. It'll be in September. We do about 3 or 4 of these a year. We usually have anywhere from 50 to 100 people that have signed up to watch them. So you had a lot of people with eyes on you today. Our next one in September is going to be on From Vacancy to Vitality, the Power of Adaptive Reuse. We did this last year, and this year we're doing the same topic, but I'm bringing in somebody from out of the city who's done big urban adaptive reuse, which is very, very difficult to do. And then also some here locally, two locally experts who can talk about it. So I want to encourage all of you to come to the next one in September and keep your eye peeled for what we're doing. In the Cathedral District-Jax produces a calendar of events for the whole month, for the whole year of 2026. And if you go to our website, you can see that calendar of events. So thank you both, Nancy and Lindsay, and thanks, Misha, for pulling us all together.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you, Jenny.
I just want to say that Jenny and the Cathedral District is a great example of good urban planning. Her experience, they've got a master plan, they think holistically, and they think, course development by development. So Ginny, your experience has been invaluable. And we want all the people in the Cathedral District to walk also to the riverfront and be able to
Oh,
go
yeah.
back and forth.
Yeah.
But your area within downtown is really important for the whole downtown.
Thanks. Thanks for that little atta girl. I appreciate it.
Ditto.
All righty. Thank you, ladies.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Well, welcome.